So a huge thank you to AC and Blue Origin for sponsoring and supporting this conference this year. Up next, we have a really great panel lined up. It's called on international space development. It'll be moderated by Dr. Ben Corbin. He's a research staff member at the IDA Science and Technology Policy Institute, where he and his colleagues serve the Office of Science and Technology Policy in the Executive Office of the President, as well as other executive branches, agencies, and departments like NASA, DHF, and NSF. So without further ado, Ben.
Thank you. And while you guys are coming up, I'll go ahead and give the brief introduction to this panel. So since our inception, the Space Frontier Foundation has promoted commercial and private industry in space as an economic means for achieving long-term space goals, without relying solely on sovereign programs dictated by national politics. The recent boom in the commercial space market, especially the explosion of the small satellite market, has consequently lowered the barrier to entry for sovereign players in space, allowing more countries and organizations to have a presence in space. Now we see traditional and recent spacefaring nations have robust and growing space portfolios, and they're working together with private entities towards common objectives and sovereign goals. So today we have an exciting and packed panel, so I'll try to make these introductions brief. We'll explore what some of these players have done, what they're doing now, what they plan to do in the near future, who they're partnering with, how they're engaging with the private sector and other international entities to achieve goals that may have been impossible due to prohibitive costs or a lack of political will just not too long ago in the past. So today I'm honored to introduce representatives from 5 different agencies we have with us. So Salem Marri, representing the United Arab Emirates, Pierre Franck, representing Luxembourg, Lluc Diaz, representing the European Space Agency, we'll flip, Francis van Ruth, representing Australia, and Beth Vaccarezza, representing the United Kingdom. So I'll let each panelist speak briefly on their national programs before we get into some of those questions. So starting with Salem.
Thank you very much, Ben. Yes, I'm very happy to just give a quick introduction to the UAE National Space Program that we have housed under the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center. I'd like to start with a short, well, I call it an action movie, but it's very short, and hopefully you enjoy it. There we go. Yes, so to introduce Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center, we were established in 2006 as the Emirates Institute for Advanced Science and Technology, and then we had a name change, which was the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center, which is basically named after the Prime Minister of the United Arab Emirates. I think that change also indicates that there's a much bigger interest in space, and there's much more support for the space industry in our country. We are obviously a young country and a young space program, but as you'll hear from my presentation, very dynamic with very interesting and unique programs for the region, but some of them are also unique on a global level as well. Really briefly to give you the focus area that we have on the UAE National Space Program is 4 main areas. Sorry, these slides are...
Some troubles.
There we go, okay.
Gosh.
Okay, well, before we go into that, we'll just talk a little bit about the center then. So we have about 200 employees at the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center. Most of these employees are young UAE nationals. The average age is under 30, so that's quite indicative of the demographics of the country. And about 40%, actually higher now, it's 45 or 46%, are females. So that's also indicative of the change that is happening in our country, but also in the region itself. The Mohammed Barasha Space Center houses the UAE National Space Program, which comprises 4 main initiatives. The first one, which is the first initiative that we started with, was the UAE National Satellite Development Program. And this was really an initiative from the country to start developing satellites in the United Arab Emirates. And the goal was early on that we need to develop these satellites in the UAE using UAE capabilities. The second program, which is actually a very exciting program, which happened about 2015, was that the country decided to send a mission to Mars. And the idea behind that was that, okay, we have capabilities to build satellites, but we also need to build our scientific capabilities. And I'll talk more about them as well. A third strategy and initiative was the Mars 2117 strategy, which was put by the government to really indicate a long-term vision and a long-term plan that the country is focused on Mars and getting a colony built on Mars, and how, basically the journey of doing that in the UAE. And the fourth and the most recent one was the UAE Human Spaceflight Program, and that was obviously that the United Arab Emirates wants to have a sustainable human spaceflight program that can then achieve some of the objectives of our Mars 2117 strategy and others in basically some of the experiments that would be conducted on the ground can then be conducted in space. And really to give a bit of a brief about each one of these. So the first one that we started with was the Satellite Development Program, and what we started with was a knowledge transfer program with South Korea, where we developed satellites in the United Arab Emirates. And we first started with the DubaiSat-1, where we developed about 30% of the satellite with our partners. And then we slowly started to increase that capability, and we developed our second satellite, which both of them were remote sensing satellites. And the second satellite, as you can see here, is DubaiSat-2, and we developed about 50% of that satellite. These are both in orbit currently, and DubaiSat-2 is producing about 1 meter resolution, and we subsample that to 70 centimeters. And these satellites actually produce a lot of useful data for the government, locally and regionally as well. And then obviously the idea was that eventually we would be able to develop satellites in the UAE, and that's what's happened with our third satellite, which is called Khalifa-Sat. It's named after the president of the UAE, and this is really the first satellite that was entirely built in the United Arab Emirates in our clean rooms at the Mohammed Barasha Space Center, and it will be launched on a Japanese H-2A rocket on October 29th of this year. So we're very excited because that's really a big milestone for the country. We also have other different programs that are happening. So this is an example of a CubeSat mission where, as I mentioned, there's a lot of interest going on. So as these satellites are being developed, now we have a lot of CubeSat missions with the universities in the UAE. This mission here is called DMSat, which is Dubai Municipality Sat, and this is really, in my opinion, going full circle, where other government departments now are coming to us and saying that we want you to develop satellites for us to solve specific challenges that these entities have. So Dubai Municipality wanted to look at having a satellite to detect greenhouse gases, and then we are working with partners to develop this mission, and this will be launched next year. So you can see now early on there was a lot of challenge towards how are we going to use this data. Now it's coming, the entities are coming to us to build satellite missions for them. The second program, and I'll quickly try to go through this, is the Emirates Mars mission. So this mission is called Al-Amal in Arabic, which means hope. The idea behind this mission is also that we're giving hope to the region. We're living in a difficult neighborhood. There's a lot of, let's say, challenges happening in the region, and this mission was a way to say that we can go different directions. So we can go towards science and technology, or we can take other less constructive directions. So it's really a mission for the region itself, and it's to showcase that we can do a lot when we put our minds together and we partner with international partners. So this mission will be launched in 2020. It's currently under development. We've partnered with partners here in the United States, academic partners. They're doing a great job. We have about 100 people working on this mission currently between these different partners in different locations around the world. And it will come and it will be assembled in 2020 in Dubai, and then head to, again, Japan for a launch in 2020. This mission will be doing some unique science. It'll be a continuation of some of the NASA missions that we have. So if you know the MAVEN mission, that's studying the atmosphere of Mars, this mission will be doing a little bit further on the studies that happened with MAVEN. So we'll be studying basically the relationship between the upper and lower atmospheres. And this data is very important if we eventually want to put humans on Mars. We have to understand how the atmosphere reacts. And so this is something that we're very excited with. We're also partnering with 200 international institutions to use this data and cooperate internationally on it. The third project we have is the Mars 2117 project, or the Mars 2117 strategy. As I indicated earlier, this is a long-term vision by the country to put a colony on Mars by 100 years from today. And what that means is that we are committed to space. So we're committed to Mars, we're committed to the journey getting there. We know that there are steps that would take you to Mars before getting to Mars itself, so the moon is one of them. And what the UAE wants to do is to have a platform that can be unique internationally, where we can cooperate on achieving these objectives collectively. This strategy will have a lot of projects, and one of the first projects we have is the Mars Science City. Well, before I go into that, maybe I'll talk about this. So why is this program important to the UAE? This program is important because getting to Mars obviously has a lot of challenges. So, energy, food, and water, etc. And we have a very similar climate, a little bit hotter to Mars in the UAE, which is basically you can't grow much in the UAE. Energy is obviously an issue, and then water is one of the biggest problems that we have, I think globally, but also specifically in the UAE, this is a big issue. So whatever we do towards research, development, towards getting to Mars can really help us here on the ground. And as I was saying earlier, one of the first projects that we have is the Mars Science City project. So this is a very unique project. It is being developed jointly with international partners, and what we plan to do is to build a very large, what we call a city, but basically it's domed structures that will be about 2 million square feet in size, and we'll have 6 or 7 different labs that will be focusing on those challenges that we had. So one of them is robotics, one of them is research on food, research on energy, research on water, and basically we'll also have a unique analog experiment being conducted in this city that would basically try to achieve objectives that haven't been achieved before. So we don't want to repeat what others are doing, we want to kind of add on to what this community has been doing. I'll be ending my slide soon. So the last program I spoke about was the UAE Astronauts program. The objective behind this was that we would select astronauts from the United Arab Emirates, train them with our international partners, and then launch them into the ISS and eventually beyond. And what we wanted to have was to have basically the first astronaut corps for the region, and one of the first, obviously, in the Arab world as well. We've had astronauts coming out from the region, but usually it's for very short durations, and then nothing happens for 30, 40 years. So what we have here is now we've opened up the call for candidates. We had over 4,000 people applying, and from all different walks of life. The youngest was a 13-year-old girl. She's not going. And the oldest was a 67-year-old man. He's also not going. And 38% of them were women. So that's really indicative of what young women in the country and in the region think that they can achieve for the UAE. We're now down to the top 95, and we plan to select our final astronauts in the coming weeks. We recently signed, last week in Vienna, an agreement with Roscosmos to launch this astronaut, and that will be happening in April of next year. So that will be our first mission, and then we plan to have continuous missions and hopefully long duration, 6 months and above, in the ISS with our partners in NASA. So this is really a brief about the UAE space program, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Salem. Pierre.
No, I need to. Thank you. Thank you. Try to get this started. Just to introduce myself, I'm Pierre Franck. I'm the Consul General of Luxembourg, based in San Francisco. And, this about what people think I'm doing and what I'm really doing is I'm not dividing my time between cocktail parties, golf course, and yacht club, but what I'm really doing is being the, well, I don't get this okay. What I'm really doing is being the director of the Trade and Investment Office and to assist US companies, mostly tech companies, to set up or expand the presence in Europe and to promote Luxembourg as a hub within the European market. And as I have come to realize is that many of you, or most of you even, know at least as much about Luxembourg and space than I do. So I'm going to walk you quickly through this presentation, just to kind of introduce for those who would happen not to have heard about Luxembourg and space. And so Luxembourg Space started actually 30 years ago. So it's not a new venture for us. It started in the mid-80s when with a public-private partnership that led to the creation of the SES company, a global satellite operator based in Luxembourg. The government of Luxembourg still holds 30% of the shares of this company today. And over time, we joined ESA and other agencies and developed this sector. Actually, through these 30 years, we a whole value chain established in Luxembourg and different activities around this industrial anchor that is SES in the space ground operations, in-space operations, also all kinds of services, legal services, IT, and so forth. And this comprises both industrial companies, but also public or public-private actors. As you know, on the bottom right, you see a public research center called LIST, Luxembourg Institute for Science and Technology, the university, and so forth. You also will see a couple of US companies that have established a presence in Luxembourg. Okay, so this is the current space policy. Basically, it's the why space. It's one of the how shall I say, the sectors in which the government of Luxembourg is trying to diversify our economy. You know that most of you who have heard of Luxembourg might know that it's a financial center basically, and its financial industry is makes up for about 30% of the GDP of Luxembourg. So it's very fortunate for us, but at the same time we're quite vulnerable, being so dependent on this sector. And over the last decades, successive governments have tried to diversify the economy, and the space industry is one of those. The tools that we have is basically funding, access to funding, be it national funding, be it European funding through ESA or European Union programs. Now I'm come to speak about a more recent initiative, which is the spaceresources.lu initiative. So it's about the utilization of space resources. This is the new venture, is the NewSpace, if I could say so, venture, as opposed to old space around SES. So why is Luxembourg supporting and promoting this venture? Of course, we believe that in future there is a huge potential to use these resources and to enable an in-space economy, also to enable deeper space exploration, and of course we would like to build this sector and create economic value and substance in Luxembourg. Of course, to realize this goal, there are many challenges, technical challenges, of course. Regulatory challenges, the global legal framework does not forbid it, but it does not foresee it at the same time. So Luxembourg has adopted a law, a Space Act, which is similar to the American Space Act, which is and we are the second, and followed soon by the Emirates. Ours differs from the U.S. Space Act in 2 points, major points. One is that it's open for foreign investment, meaning that international companies can set up a presence in Luxembourg and benefit from this legislation. And the second is that we have a regulator, meaning that companies need to buy a license that would then limit and define what they would be doing in space. Financial challenges, again, Luxembourg can leverage its financial center, also being headquarters for the European Investment Bank is one of the also assets, and of course business solutions. What is Luxembourg doing to address these challenges and to attract investment to Luxembourg? Of course, there is being a small country and being very reactive allows us to give strong support at the highest level to companies, to business solutions. Building the framework, we have, I just talked about that, but also we are engaging with the international partners, signing up with countries like the Emirates, but others like China, Russia, US, and so forth, to build a group of like-minded countries and to engage into international negotiations to adapt the international legal framework. Financial support, of course, as I said, there are national but also European financial instruments that can be used. Also focusing on building, as I said, economic substance in Luxembourg. For instance, we have an R&D support scheme that would allow companies that establish a presence in Luxembourg to have up to 50% of their R&D activities financed or subsidized by the Luxembourg government. Dedicated support for industrial research, meaning the public research agency, Luxembourg Institute for Science and Technology, the university, and others, because we believe that companies they need 3 things basically when they come to Europe or to Luxembourg. Or they need funding, they need a workforce, and they need a market. So. And that's the last item. We hope that they know tech. They know they own the technology, but we can help them with all the other aspects to develop their activities in Europe and globally, basically. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think Lluc is next with the AV.
Thank you very much. So my name is Lluc Diaz, and you can imagine from my last name, I'm not German. So, well, probably you don't seem to know quite a lot, but they are out of the World Cup. So in Germany, probably everybody's getting pissed nowadays, or at this moment. I represent the European Space Agency. Thank you very much, I appreciate it. Thank you very much to the NewSpace conference for the invitation to speak here. Well, probably you know what the European Space Agency. In Europe, sometimes we have to say we're the NASA in Europe, unfortunately. So here I can say it, and it's quite okay. We are representing 22 member states in Europe, if that works, yeah. So we have 50 years of experience, 22 member states, 8 different sites with about 2,300 staff people. And we manage a budget of around 5.75 billion euros. It's significantly less than NASA's budget, but nevertheless our focus is broader. We have over 80 satellites designed and tested operational nowadays. ESA has been the baseline for companies like Arianespace, Eutelsat, EUMETSAT, and other organizations like this. So we have been precursors of a lot of different activities. But today, okay. The role of this, the idea of the conversation today, of the presentation today, is to talk about what we're doing in NewSpace. But I will start for something different because, we're Europeans, and my DG, who is German actually, Dr. Jan Werner, he talks about space 4.0. We don't really like to use the term new space, which we use anyway, because it means that there is all space, and then what we would call all space companies would complain because they don't like being called all space, right? So then we come up with this space 4.0, and the explanation behind it that space 4.0 is astronomy, the first astronomy that was done. Space 2.0 was the space race that happened in the 60s. The space 3.0 is the ISS, and space 4.0 is where we are now, which is basically what we can call new space in this closed environment, not public at all. So there are 4 main areas of work: information, inspiration, interaction, and the one that I'm mainly working is innovation. We believe that this new space has to do with 2 main areas of work. The first one is looking at technology differently, but following on a conversation that I heard yesterday, it's how you really propose the business models, right? And this is where we're working on. Sorry, it doesn't seem to move. So I'm going to talk about 3 different initiatives that we're trying to do. Sorry, if we can move. Yeah, good. Sorry. Okay, so the first thing is where I'm working. I'm working in the Technology Transfer and Business Incubation Office. This office was created 20 years ago, but as a technology transfer activity, so how to reuse a space technology in other sectors. The goal was basically to prove society that we have a meaningful impact beyond just the space activities, which sometimes are quite far away from the day-by-day of people. But with time, we realized that we were having a lot of entrepreneurs wanting to use a space technology to create businesses out of space or even in space. So since we started working in this technology transfer and business incubation activities, we supported more than 340 cases of technology transfer. And nowadays, as you can see in this map, we have around, I believe, 20 locations, and we're supporting 160 space-related startups per year. So in total, we supported more than 600 companies, and we are probably the biggest space-related startup ecosystem. What is the support that we give in this framework? Basically, it's access to the technical expertise of ESA through the different centers that we have or the different partners that we have, and a small financial support that goes between 50 and 100,000 euros. Last year, we had the approval to start doing also of supporting companies related to NewSpace. So far we have been basically doing a spin-off activities, and now we moved to spin-in. And just last year when we started, we had 20% of the 160 companies that we supported that were working in the NewSpace arena. Some cases that I would like to show to you. Lilium is a company using electric propulsion technology that was initially created for space. These guys raised 80 million euros from Tencent in December 2017, and they were incubated in the ISABIC in Bavaria in Germany 3 years ago. Another case is Open Cosmos. These guys are doing hardware and software in the loop. They just want to allow very low-cost missions, but also simplify the process. You just basically have to test your payload in their hardware and software in the loop, and they will integrate everything and put it on orbit and just give you your information. They raised 5 million euros this February. They announced it, and I know that they are already negotiating another round of 30 million euros. So it's quite a big and interesting project that we incubated 2 years ago. So these are the kind of projects that we are doing in the framework of the ISABICs. Other things that we're doing, and this is more in the scale-up activity. Here, the colleagues of Luxembourg talked about what they are doing. So the critical thing that we're saying is, okay, ideas in Europe we have a lot, technology, good technology we have, established industry we have, but the question is, how do we help these new startups to grow? With this 100K that we give, it's not even, that doesn't allow them to demonstrate anything, which you would need between 500,000 and 1 million. So basically we're putting other instruments in place. One of the key things that we see is private equity. And in Europe, that's the main thing that we're lacking. In the US, obviously you have access, or you have a more experience and a longer tradition in private equity investment. In Europe, this is something we're lacking. And if we look at space, there is just one fund specifically dedicated to space technologies. CNES, the French agency, already announced that they will create another fund, and Luxembourg has their future fund, which is already investing in some of the companies that I will talk about later. But this is another program. We call it ATES. It's part of the telecommunication program, and that allows basically co-financing up to 2 million euros from ESA in projects in which other investors want to put money as well. A little bit, the idea is we're looking at any sector, so that's important for us. It's not just upstream, because I think that most of the conversation that I heard were about upstream, but we're also looking at downstream. Probably you know that the Commission has been funding a project that's called Copernicus, with a lot of millions put in there from European taxpayers. And the idea now is, now we have all these data, these Earth observation data that come from the Sentinel satellites. How do we create businesses? And again, the key thing here is, what is the business model that we're proposing? Where is the opportunity for the non-space industry to see that we can, that can be an opportunity? Can you help me? Yeah, thank you. So these are companies, Aspire, I think it was mentioned, but we also work with ING, Bitbank, finance companies wanting to basically co-finance, or that we co-finance that they are using Earth observation data, telecommunications, or other space-related assets. Next slide, if you can help me, please, because another activity which is related to, it's quite similar to what NASA is doing in the partnerships. Since 2 years ago, we started this project in which we're basically partnering with space private industry that wants to have assets in the ISS, and we don't want to cover it 100%, but we're supporting with time of the astronauts, with launch opportunity, but they are the ones producing 100% the hardware that will fly, and they will be operating from terrestrial. And this is the two cases. IceCubes was launched in May this year, and Bartolome is the second project that will be flying. It's outside of the Columbus module, like an experiment capabilities, and it will be probably flying in 2019. So these are the kind of things we're doing. The agency is changing a lot in these areas of more collaboration, more partnerships. And if we look about, or we talk about the Moon Village, which is one of the things that the current ESA DG came up. It was, you know, we really need to partner because ESA cannot pay, or even the nations cannot pay fully for it. So we are now much more open than we have been, and I think it's a window of opportunity, not just for European companies, but for any company, the US included.
Thank you very much, Lluc. Francis.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here, Ben. My name's Frances Van Ruth, and I'm the Trade and Investment Commissioner and Consul for Australia, also based in San Francisco. It's great to be here to talk to you about what's been happening in space in Australia over the past year. I'm going to talk a little bit about specifically a major review that was conducted, talk about our priorities in the near and medium term, and if my slides are coming up. And then I can talk about how you can get involved. Thanks. So it's an exciting time in Australia as we're kicking off really the next phase of Australia's involvement in international space. Can we get the next slide, please? Australia has a long history of involvement and collaboration in the space, of course, with the radio telescope in Parkes, New South Wales. Thank you. So the radio telescope in Parkes, New South Wales, very few people will have heard of Parkes, except it was really key in televising Armstrong's moonwalk 50 years ago. So fast forward 50 years to 2017, in the second half of last year and early this year, the government commissioned an expert reference group to conduct a review into Australia's space industry capability. The review involved extensive public consultations and received over 200 submissions. And in March of this year, the group handed their findings to the government, some of which included that Australia's nascent space industry already employs around 10,000 people and was worth about 3.9 billion Australian dollars, so about 2.9 billion US dollars in 2015-16. that Australia has a vibrant community of active small and medium-sized enterprises and world-class research in the space sector. And there was a strong call from stakeholders for Australia to create a national space agency. The report set an ambitious goal of tripling the size of the Australian space industry by 2030 to 12 billion Australian dollars. So in May of this year, the Australian government announced its response to the review and committed $300 million to space-related activities, including $41 million to establish the Australian Space Agency. In addition to establishing the agency, $260 million was given to Geoscience Australia for 3 major space-related projects. A satellite-based augmentation system that will make positioning data accurate to 10 centimetres available across Australia. $64 million was committed to a national positioning infrastructure capability project to support positioning accuracies of 3 centimetres in areas with mobile phone coverage. And $37 million was committed to extend the Digital Earth Australia project to give industry greater access to reliable, standardised satellite imagery. Australia has also committed $10 billion over the next decade to, this is 10 billion Australian, about $7.5 billion US, to space-related defence technologies. And this will also provide a significant boost to the industry. Now the green one's not working either. There we go. So the agency commences operations on Sunday, 1st of July, and it will be led by Dr. Megan Clark initially, who's the former head of the the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation, or CSIRO. This conference itself is testament to the fact that globally the space sector is moving from the realm of governments to the commercial world, and the Australian Space Agency will be one of the world's most industry-focused agencies. Working with international partners will be central to the success of the agency. The establishment of the agency aligns with the government's emphasis on Australia building niche industry capabilities and strategically developing new commercial opportunities in the space economy. Importantly, the agency will create a one voice and one door for civic and commercial space sector in Australia, and ensuring that the space sector will contribute to Australia's future economic growth. So I'm going to touch on a few of the initial areas of focus for the agency. There we go. Maybe I've skipped too far ahead. I think we've got it. So look, there's a number of areas of focus listed on the slide, but in particular I'll talk about Australia's unique geography, covering a third of the Earth's rotation, gives Australia an opportunity to increase its role in space-to-Earth connections. Australia needs to be a part of the next generation of platforms such as low Earth orbit constellations, high-altitude platforms, and optical hybrid and free space optics. Australia also has an opportunity to become a key node in the global network for high precision and low precision commercial space situational awareness support infrastructure. That's a mouthful for me. For example, our SSA role has recently been expanded with the relocation of the US C-band space surveillance radar at the Harold Holt Defence Base in Exmouth in Western Australia, and the planned relocation to the same site of the Optical Space Surveillance Telescope. This infrastructure provides for high-tech jobs in Australia and will nurture capabilities in Australia that can contribute to the commercial space sector. Another area of focus will be Earth observation services. Australia has a competitive advantage in the application of satellite data. For example, Geoscience Australia's digital Earth technology, which was further funded in the federal budget most recently, has been heralded globally. And space observation and analysis is assisting the broader Australian economy in sectors such as agriculture, transport, planning, mining and fisheries, as it is, of course, globally. Australia has a proven track record in radio astronomy, and our involvement in the global consortia for the Square Kilometre Array is one example of this. We have an opportunity to build on our world-class R&D capabilities in areas such as quantum communication and technology, planetary science, space and remote medicine, and advanced antenna and sensor technology. One of the things that is, I guess, the nature of the large continent that we have in Australia and the challenges we have in other industries provides an opportunity for collaboration in the space sector. So Australia is a world leader in remote asset management, and in places like the Pilbara and the Northwest Shelf in Western Australia, areas the length of the United Kingdom are managed remotely from thousands of kilometres away in Perth. And this has parallels to, of course, space and managing the International Space Station from Earth is one example. It's why Australia's oil and gas company, Woodside, is partnering with NASA. NASA is uses a robotic astronaut called Robonaut to perform tasks on the ISS, and Woodside is looking to use robots to manage its remote offshore rigs, potentially removing the need for helicopters to ferry a crew to a rig in an emergency. So one of the initial tasks that the agency will be focused on is developing a detailed investment plan across these areas to transform the Australian space industry. So the final point I'll end on is to talk a bit about the organisation that I work for, the Australian Trade and Investment Commission. It's our role to work with foreign companies around the world to understand the opportunities in Australia and to facilitate investment into Australia. And collaborating internationally will be key to achieving Australia's vision for our space agency. So we welcome interest from international companies in setting up in Australia, and it's our job, again, to make sure that you understand the regulatory processes, who the players are, and how to connect in with them. So Austrade will be working very closely with the Space Agency in the coming months and years, and in the near term we'll be at ICA in Bremen in October, and then at Spacecom in Houston in November, where we'll be bringing a delegation of Australian space startups to the conference to really continue work that has happened, but step it up in terms of linking the Australian industry with the world. So my colleague is here as well, Andrew, in the back. So if you're interested in talking about what's happening in Australia or opportunities to connect, please do talk to us afterwards.
Thank you very much, Francis. And now, finally, Beth, United Kingdom.
All right, okay, good. Everyone can hear me? All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Beth Vaccarezza with the UK's Department for International Trade. So just a very brief description about what that is. DIT, for short, is the commercial arm for the UK government. And so myself and my colleague who's here in the audience with me, we work across the US market as well as globally to promote UK trade and investment. And so increasingly with space, a core policy landscape is crucial for business opportunities. And so that's where we really see the linkages between commercial and policy opportunities moving forward. So, thank you. So today I'm here to discuss about the UK space sector. So just to provide a brief roadmap of what this discussion will entail. So we'll start with the UK story so far, then move on to our ambitions moving forward, and then the strategy to help realize those ambitions. So space is a UK success story, evidenced through the key industrial players such as the small and nanosat manufacturers, the satellite operators, the space data scientists, and the instrument makers who all are a part of the UK ecosystem. Their productivity has led to roughly $14 billion in annual turnover beginning since 2015, which has enabled the UK to secure a share of roughly 7% or 6.5% of the global space market. And so while roughly 25%, so 1 in 4 of the world's telecommunication satellites are substantially produced in the UK, and 40% of all small satellites are produced within the UK. Upstream capabilities account for roughly 10% of the UK's activity in the space field. So that leaves 90% for downstream and space applications and services that the UK has core capabilities in. So with that said, the core capabilities within the UK space sector currently are small satellite manufacturing, radio frequency products, Earth observation, propulsion, as well as satellite communications. So the organizations and that really set the stage for those core capabilities to thrive within the UK, as well as internationally with partners that we have here on stage and with the US as well, are organizations like the UK Space Agency, like ESA, that has an office at the Harwell campus in Oxford, the Satellite Applications Catapult, which, as you can imagine, has quite a bit to do with the downstream capabilities that the UK has a strategic advantage in, as well as Innovate UK, which operates and works with many startups, SMEs, and companies who are working on low TRL levels to help them commercialize their technologies, as well as, of course, the Department for International Trade. So with that said, that's where we are. So where are we heading? So the UK has an ambition of growing its global space share from 6.5% to 10% by 2030. So that 10% will be roughly £40 billion worth of annual turnover that the UK hopes to secure within the broader space market. And so within that growth, there's three key areas that the UK has identified as really leading into that 10% number by 2030, and that's enabling commercial small satellite launch and suborbital space flight capabilities from UK spaceports, increasing the UK's growth in its downstream space applications and services, as well as increasing its international partnerships, both with maintaining and increasing the international partnerships moving forward. So two documents that you'll see behind me are the industrial strategy and the prosperity from space that I'll just highlight very briefly. So the industrial strategy was published last year in November 2017, and it's essentially the government's blueprint for where it sees the UK becoming more competitive moving forward. And so the space sector, so across sectors, and so the space sector is one of those key sectors that the UK is looking to really boost and bolster moving forward in terms of its capabilities. So what this entails is the three bullets that are listed underneath. So launch capabilities will be a crucial part of the UK's, for the UK to secure that 10% of the global space market by 2030. And so important that the government allocated £50 million worth of grant funding to the space agency to allocate toward UK spaceport developments for the initial stage, but the spaceports will be purely commercial moving forward. The next is creating world-class centers. So centers of excellence, of course, we have the Satellite Application Catapult, but also other centers such as the National Space Propulsion Facility, which is located in Westcott, the National Space Integration and Test Facility located at the Harwell campus, and other research and development sites that are enabling commercial players, both domestically as well as those coming in from international markets, to really test out the ecosystem and see and integrate themselves within the supply chain that the UK currently has, and that it's has a very robust ecosystem there. And so added with those research centers, there are roughly 20 incubation centers scattered all throughout England, Northern Ireland, Scotland, and Wales that are, as you can imagine, incubation centers. So they're tailored towards startups and SMEs, as well as some prime key industry players as well who are looking to kind of infuse entrepreneurship into their business models. But it's, again, another testament to some of the innovation that the UK is actively pursuing. And so just a segue, so I'm very happy that Open Cosmos was on your slide, Lluc, earlier. So they are a UK company, and they're based out of Harwell. So again, another testament to the international footprint that and partnerships that the UK is really looking to push forward moving forward. So to move on next to the Space Industry Act 2018, this is the UK's first core and really groundbreaking legislation that it will enable for the first time ever UK British businesses and international partners to launch small satellites from UK soil. And again, this is based, so kind of leading back up to the launch capabilities that the UK is looking to secure. We now have the regulatory footprint in place to enable launch to actually happen. And so the UK Space Agency is currently undergoing due diligence to make sure that the regulatory environment around liability, insurance, and pricing are all intact so that everyone can be more or less happy with opportunities to that end. So to jump down to prosperity from space, this is the UK industry's response to the industrial strategy. And so it was published in May of 2018, and was published in collaboration with government, academia, so UK industry with UK Space, which is the trade association for the UK space industry, Innovate UK, Satellite Applications Catapult, and Department for International Trade. And so the main thing is that there is joint cohesion between industry and government moving forward. And so in terms of building upon the UK's capabilities as they currently stand and leveraging them so that they can really tap into the burgeoning commercial space market and new space market moving forward. And so within that prosperity from space were 4 new markets for commercial opportunities that were designated that the UK will be pursuing much more actively moving forward. And that is connectivity in space robotics, Earth information services, and low-cost access to space. So to that latter point, access to space, again, in part because launch opportunities are a key way for the UK to, again, get to that 10% market share by 2030. So, of course, having British businesses and international businesses being able to come and launch out of either the vertical or horizontal spaceport sites, which are currently being discussed within the space agency. There's also, this ambition was also fueled by the $10 billion estimated future market in the next 20 years for small satellite services. So again, a market that the UK is hoping to be one of the first movers on in terms of a spaceport location within the UK and the greater European market. And so again, vertical and horizontal options are being discussed. And as I mentioned previously, while the government does have £50 million to support initial launch and initial site development, these spaceports will be purely commercially based, and so providing for more opportunities for businesses to work in partnership with each other, and again, to have the regulatory environment that will be sufficient for enabling launches to actually take place and to make sure that everyone is secure in those capabilities. So in addition to launch, the UK sees a strategic future in maintaining, engaging, and increasing its international partnerships. So a part of that will be maintaining its membership of ESA, and so the UK is committed to carrying out its roughly €1.5 billion commitment to the agency. And year on year, the UK contributes roughly £30 million in programming as well to ESA. So that's definitely a membership that we are encouraged and excited to continue to see where that takes place and how that unfolds with future programs. But as well, there's a huge opportunity for the UK to engage in international partnerships with space nations outside of Europe, and that's something that we are actively looking to engage. So 2 ways that we'll do that is, one is leveraging the current priority markets that cross-government departments have designated. So for the Department for International Trade has currently designated this year the US and India as key export markets for UK space exports. And so the space agency will absolutely look to partner with DIT to see about commercial partnerships, but as well as engage space nations and create a broader conversation to push forward discussions and collaborations that otherwise have not yet had a chance to form yet. And so that's a part of the enhanced national program that we are very excited to start beginning discussions on. And so with that, as a parting thought, it's a theme across the panel that partnerships are key, right? And so the UK is no exception. Our history of international companies, of companies working internationally, but also international companies working and thriving within the UK ecosystem is very robust, and something that we are more than happy, my colleague Pauline and I are more than happy to discuss with you after this panel session, as well as discuss during this panel session. So there's lots of opportunities, and we're happy to explore those with all of you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Excellent discussions from all the panelists. Luckily, we do have a networking break right after this. I know we're a little bit short on time. This was our biggest panel and some of the best content we've seen. I know a lot of exciting things are happening, so I'm going to take my moderator's privilege to ask a few questions, and then if we have some time, we'll turn it over to the audience. So I'll try to ask some quick-fire questions that are eligible for everyone, but I'll try to determine who I would like to see an answer from first. So my first question is more for the UAE and Luxembourg. Both countries relatively small. I refuse to call Luxembourg a microstate because every microstate can fit inside Luxembourg, but two countries with very strong histories in financial economies who are going into generating big space programs now. Do you see transformations in the educations or other areas of society as a result of the advances you're making in space? Do you see your general population getting more involved or excited about what's happening in space? And this is for everyone, but mostly you two.
Thank you for your question. Actually, yeah, Luxembourg is the size of Rhode Island, so 1,000 square miles, basically. And we used to joke about Luxembourg, through SES, the satellite operator that runs 50-something geostationary birds. We used to say that Luxembourg is bigger in space than on Earth, since our footprint in space is far larger. And this brings me to your point. We had this discussion 35 years ago in the mid-'80s when this venture SES was launched. At the time, it was a huge gamble. For instance, for the first launch in 1988, there was no insurance, private insurance to be acquired, and the government had to pass a bill to ensure the launch, and had it gone wrong, it would have amounted to 5% of general expenditure of the government. So that was quite the thing, and the discussion at the time that took place in the public was, who's needing this? Why are you doing that? We have 5 TV channels. Why do we need more than this? I mean, imagine this discussion today. So we've had this 30 years ago, and today the general public and the nation as such is very how should I say, space friendly, is very up to date, and this is not really an issue. It really has embraced this, and so we have the ability to, as a small country, to use all, to leverage every strength that we have and every actor that we have, institutional, government, academia, and so forth, towards this goal.
Well, yes. So definitely the UAE is a small country, but we do have big impact. I mean, when you look at the types of companies that we have, I'll give examples of Emirates Airlines. It's one of the largest international airlines in the world. Dubai International Airport has about 80 million passengers a year. I mean, these are huge numbers for quite a small country. We definitely like to leverage our location. The population of the United Arab Emirates is about 10 million. 10% of them are from the UAE, so UAE nationals. So that shows you how international cooperation, working globally, is part of our DNA. And the same applies to what we're doing in space. So in recent years, the UAE has committed over $5 billion to development of the space sector. Specifically, what we're doing at the center here is focused on developing local capabilities with international partnerships. So what we've seen, to answer Ben's question, is that with the development of the space industry, we've seen universities starting to grow and build dedicated space centers. So we have about 6 now space centers built in 6 different universities in the UAE that are really bringing out graduates, UAE nationals and non-UAE nationals, to come directly and work in the space industry, whether it's private or public.
Okay, thank you. So our next panel is going to be on space policy, so this is sort of a little bit of a transitional question there, more geared toward Francis, but anyone who has thoughts on this. Last week, we enacted Space Policy Directive 3, which deals with space traffic management, space situational awareness. I guess my question to this international panel is, what does the U.S. need to do to make sure that it has rules in place that other nations will follow, such that we don't have to reopen the Outer Space Treaty or, become a big mess in space. What are some of the rules that you would like to see, or how you would work with the U.S. in terms of getting a coherent, safe space traffic management policy without having something oppressive or some other country telling you, oh, you need to do this, we don't need to do that. Can you guys give any guidance on what you would want to see from a space traffic management regime started by the U.S., but that has to be done internationally?
Thanks for the question, Ben. I wouldn't be in the role I'm in if I didn't know not to comment on policy areas that were not within my purview. So what I would say, rather than completely avoid the question, is that Australia and the US have a very long strategic partnership together. And so working together is something we've done for a long time and that we do well. So I'm not familiar with the specifics of this piece of policy, but I think policy development in an in an area such as space, which obviously all countries have an interest in, policy agreement is reached incrementally and through several rounds of discussions and negotiations. So I think I would leave it there to say that I would trust the strength of our relationship and the parties that would be at that table to bring forward the issues that need to come to bear.
Very diplomatic answer, but also quite correct. Okay, final question, and this one's even harder. This one's for Lluc and Beth, and I'm sorry. How is Brexit playing out right now? What is happening? Is it hurting some of these partnerships between the UK and ESA? Is there more friction? Is it doing better than other areas? Just a quick update. I know we're running low on time, and it was awful mean of me to spring that question.
I'm her client, basically.
So in the presentation, there was a lot of insistence on creating international partnerships, right? So maintaining our partnerships with ESA, as well as looking elsewhere to other nations that we are hoping to engage further. And I think that is one of the largest implications that Brexit has. It's the not so small elephant in the room. But with that, we don't see that as a hindrance to our capabilities and our partnerships moving forward, because ESA in our relationship isn't contingent upon being a part of the EU. So they're separate. And so that's really helpful for us in terms of being able to engage the European Space Agency. Again, ESA has an office at the Harwell campus and is very strongly integrated into the UK space ecosystem. And the mutual collaboration between both will be crucial moving forward in terms of how we're able to push forward with our launch capabilities, right? Working with Diaz on air traffic controls and what that will look like. So it's crucial that we have this partnership, and that's something that right now, there's discussions taking place, but we are operating as business as usual, because business will always find a way to succeed, and that's one of the benefits that our spaceports are purely commercially driven rather than government driven.
Yeah, I think Beth pointed out the most important thing, and it's the European Space Agency is independent from the Commission, right? So that's something beneficial for countries like the UK in the future, but also Norway or Switzerland, which are not part of the Commission. I think the main challenge is obviously the participation in programs like Galileo, Copernicus, mainly Galileo for the private use. I think there's going to be a way of working together. The position of the Commission now is a bit hard, I think, in the topic, right? They are trying to make a point, and it's perfectly fair. But the collaboration with the UK in terms of the European Space Agency has been growing in the last years, and it seems it's going to continue to grow. So we count the UK as one of the most important partners among our member states.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry, but we are out of time. I think we are about to go into a networking break, so if you do have additional questions for these panelists, we can have chats with them and their contingents out in the reception area. So please give this panel a big round of applause.